And welcome to a very special Palace Confidential interview today. Joining me is a royal writer and commentator who's worked with some of the world's biggest publications and broadcasters. And she's also the author of 5 books on the royal family. The latest is called The New Royals, Queen Elizabeth's Legacy and the Future of the Crown. Welcome, Kate Nicholl.
Thank you, Jo.
Thanks
to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. Now, your book, congratulations, arrives at an extraordinary time, just weeks after the passing of the Queen. Now, the royals have now been thrust into these new roles that they possibly thought they had a couple of years maybe to get their head around moving into. So it's really tumultuous at the moment, isn't it?
It's been an enormous upheaval, of course, for the royal family, but also for the nation as well. I think for all of us, you know, there was this sort of belief, as ridiculous as it would be, that we would have the Queen forever.
It's really true.
It is, and I think when we think back, and obviously, you know, I've sort of covered the royals for the last 20 years, but even I feel like we've all taken her a bit for granted, and we just expected that she would be here forever. But of course, that was never going to be the case. And you know, I sort of set about writing this book very much with the intention of wanting to pay tribute to that remarkable reign, that incredible legacy. And it was a wonderful thing going back and spanning her reign, speaking to people who knew her, people who'd worked with her, people who sort of finally ready to talk, knowing that this was really the twilight years of her reign. And then, of course, I couldn't have just done that. It had to be about forward-looking, the next generation of royals, what the future of the royal family was going to look like, what Charles's reign is likely to look like, and, of course, the Cambridge dynasty, now the Waleses, after that.
And how do you think the family, just as human beings, as family members, are coping at the moment? Do you have any sense of that?
Well, I think, you know, the Prince and Princess of Wales just on a phenomenally successful trip in Wales, and they looked really happy to be out, back on duty. Of course, they had, you know, an extended period of mourning from the rest of us. They had an extra 7 days, so some time to just process what had happened, because when you look back at those remarkable 12 days after the Queen had died, you know, there was no time really for any of them to absorb or to think about anything at all. You know, King Charles was back at Buckingham Palace, you know, the morning after it had happened, and so I think that mourning period was important, but I think there is a sense for all of them of wanting to get back to work now. You know, I reveal in The New Royals that the King, as he is now, and it's always, I keep finding myself saying Prince Charles,
aren't we? Yeah.
The King had a sort of a 5-year master plan all laid out, you know, and I think we're going to see that executed almost immediately. You know, he's going to want to get to work very quickly. He spent decades waiting for this moment and waiting to become king, the role that he was born to do. And now we're going to see, you know, him lay down the markers of his reign.
We'll come to that in a minute, but first I want to talk about this quote that you have from one of Charles's and Camilla's friends, is saying, right now they've got a nice rhythm and a lovely life. It's like, bang, that's done with.
Yeah.
They must be feeling so strange right now.
I think it's, you know, of course, only they know how they feel, but, you know, they were in a lovely rhythm. And, you know, Camilla is 75, Charles is 73, turned 74 this year. And, you know, they're at an age where most people are beginning to think about perhaps winding down, not necessarily retiring, but certainly slowing down. And, of course, for them, everything's now just going to step up several gears. And so it is going to be a huge change. It is going to be a big pace change. And I think, you know, we've seen in the King this remarkable work ethic. You know, I spoke to many aides, including someone who'd worked with him for 20 years, who said it was very common for him to be working well past midnight, burning the midnight oil. But, you know, the Duchess sort of didn't operate at that same pace, and I think, you know, that's going to be one of the challenges, is sort of keeping up with Charles's pace of life. And I think for the Duchess, well, now the Queen Consort, she's going to, you know, it is a big shifting gear.
Now, I think we all know that King Charles will be wanting to put his stamp on his reign very quickly, but he's also got 1 or 2 family problems to sort out. Which do you think which should take his priority at the moment, and how will he handle that?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the Queen had a remarkable ability to compartmentalise. I think that was so key to the success of her reign. And I think, you know, Charles will probably have to do the same. I mean, as you say, there are many familial issues here. You know, the rift at the heart of the family of the House of Windsor is no secret. You know, we see no signs of a real sort of long-term meaningful reconciliation, although I'm told it's very much on the King's agenda. You know,
really?
He knows that a royal family has to be a united royal family. That's important for him on a personal level, and it's important for him as the King, and I think he's going to do everything he can. And I think we saw evidence of that with those olive branches that were extended to Harry and Meghan.
Yes, but he's also has a solid reputation as being quite non-confrontational, which you touch on, and that's going to need to change, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I say in the book that, you know, he hated falling out with his sons. He didn't like it. You know, would rather just retreat than have anything that was combative in any sense. But you're right. He's going to have to make some pretty difficult decisions, and you know, the titles.
Have some difficult conversations.
Difficult decisions. Probably starting with whether Archie and Lilibet are going to get those titles.
And now, what do you think is going to happen there? That is the source of so much speculation and derision at the moment, isn't it?
I mean, I'm told that we all know Charles has long wanted a streamlined monarchy, and it's very interesting that Queen Margherita has just stripped, you know, other than those in direct line of accession, of those HRH titles. And I point out through the constitutional experts who I spoke to for this book, the likes of Peter Hennessy, Dr. Ed Owens, they saw this pattern of the British monarchy moving more into a sort of European-style royalty. And if that is the case, then possibly they're not going to get these titles. I mean, the one thing we know is that titles matter to Charles. It was important to him that Queen Camilla Consort was Queen Consort Camilla, that she had that title. We don't know what's going to happen about the Duke of Edinburgh title, and we don't know whether he's going to give it to Archie and Lilibet. I mean, it would be the most extraordinary olive branch and act of reconciliation, I think, if he did. But I think if that happens, it's going to come with a caveat. He's not going to allow, or he's going to insist that Harry and Meghan are respectful of the institution, if indeed they're taking the titles of the institution. I think that's going to be very important to him.
It's interesting because you talk about Charles being, you know, very attached to titles and placing real importance on them. But then I'm still confused about where Meghan and Harry feel about titles. I've heard everything from complaints that their children are not allowed to be prince and princess for whatever reason, to we want our children to grow up in Hollywood, having a normal, authentic, royal-free life. So do you know which one it is that they want?
Well, they seem to alternate between the two, don't they? I mean, initially, I remember very clearly being briefed by their camp that they wanted them to be Mr. and Miss, you know, Master Archie, and that was what they wanted, all as a part of them having a sort of as low-key an existence as they could, given who they were. And, you know, I remember speaking to Harry on more than one occasion when he, you know, would sort of bemoan being a prince and everything that title, you know, weighed on him.
Well, he's always seen it as being trapped, hasn't he?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and when I sat down with Princess Anne to interview her for Vanity Fair, and I asked her about titles because she made the decision not to have royal titles for her children, and she spoke about how she wanted to give them a start in life where they didn't have that weight of burden. And you know, I think most people totally understood why Harry and Meghan didn't want it, and are now quite confused as to why the issues of prince and princess are important. Is it because it's important for their new careers? I mean, they wouldn't get the HRH anyway because they wouldn't be able to use it because Harry and Meghan can't. But, you know, prince and princess is going to carry a lot more weight, of course, in America with what they do. And then there's the security issue attached with it, which I think is one of the sort of legitimate reasons for wanting those titles. And Joe, it's the title that is owed to Harry and his children because he's son of the sovereign, and the rules at the moment are that the sons of sovereign's children will also take that title.
I'm sort of annoyed with myself for how gripped I am by that whole thing. I can't wait to see what actually does happen.
It will be very interesting to see what the King does and whether he uses that as a sort of final conciliatory move and absolutely to bring Harry and Meghan back in. But you know, that I think so much of it comes down to a matter of trust, and there is a great sense that that bond of trust has been broken by the couple.
Well, it's interesting, though, isn't it? Because what you do talk about is Ken Wharf talking about Prince Charles as a father, and this is where, you know, we've heard Harry's views on Charles as a father, and I was fascinated by this detail of his expecting his sons to be in smart suits and ties at the breakfast table rather than just normal sort of kids' clothes, jeans, trainers. It seems very Victorian.
Well, I think, you know, it was always Diana, wasn't it, who had the kids in bomber jackets and took them out on Kensington High Street to McDonald's and sort of gave them that real formality, where I think there was more formality with Charles and, you know, all the traditional pursuits that you would expect with royal children, the hunting and the stalking and the fishing. That said, you know, I spoke to people who also went to great lengths to say how hands-on he was. I spoke to one aide who remembered that, you know, diary schedules would be changed so that, you know, he could be back for tea time and for the routines that he wanted to be a part of. And so I think from everything I gleaned from the people that I spoke to who were close to Charles or had worked with him, is that he adores his boys. I mean, that's why I think this rift is so hard for him and why he's so keen to sort it out. I mean, he has that unconditional love for his children, as any parent does.
But he does often strike me as possibly not the easiest father. Won't text, won't phone, you know, all of those things.
There's a story in there, actually, that you've just triggered my memory on, when I was told by one of his aides that, I think it was William, one of them was trying to reach Charles. This was historic. This was quite a few years ago when they were younger, and wanted to get hold of him. But of course, Charles didn't carry a mobile phone around. He couldn't bear the things. And so they, you know, they could never sort of get, when they wanted to check something quickly, it was always through an aide. And I think, you know, there were times when they got frustrated by not being able to reach him. And he worked round the clock as well.
Yeah, and we've also seen recently how angry he got with a pen. So it's like, you know, let's not even go there with the phones.
But who hasn't got angry with the
leaking?
Well,
especially in that week.
At that moment, at that very important moment.
It was a very sad week. Now, you do describe the formerly Cambridge, now the Wales's family dynamic. How much of that is a response, do you think, to William's upbringing?
Well, I think, you know, hats off to William and Catherine in how they're raising their children, because they seem to be sort of finding that, and it's a difficult balance between sort of making them aware of who they are. You know, particularly Prince George, he knows his father's going to be king. He knows that one day he will be. He's very aware of that. But then also has this balance of this wonderfully normal life as well, play dates. You know, as a little one, he was taken down the road to Holland Park. He'd play, you know, with friends in the sandpit. A really lovely, ordinary life, coupled with that awareness of his destiny. But I think, you know, there were points, certainly, when William did feel the pressure of his destiny. I remember being told when he was on a gap year, when he was 18, 19 in Chile, he said to everyone else, well, you're so lucky you can choose what you're going to do. I'm going to have to be king. And so I think he's very keen not to sort of pass that burden on too soon to George. And I think what's lovely as well is that you see with George and Charlotte, who we are seeing much more of, is that role of heir and the spare being played out all over again. You can see the support that Charlotte gives to George, and it is a lovely dynamic.
And do you think how much is affected, do you think, by the fact that we are possibly looking in the next few years at a different kind of monarchy? Are they very aware that they are possibly grooming children who might not have the same roles in the royal family? I'm thinking of Louis, for instance.
Well, yes, and one of the things I was told was how they sort of look to the Wessexes, to Edward and Sophie, and have really admired the fact that, you know, Lady Louise got a job at the gardening centre and is going off, following William actually, to St Andrews University. And it's a bit different. They're not in direct line to the throne. But I think through sending them to relatively ordinary schools, co-ed schools, this lovely life that they're able to have now in Windsor, I think it's incredibly important to them, because it anchors them. And I point this out in the book as well. You know, there was a time when William and Kate enjoyed going and topping up their tans in Mustique. Well, it's bucket and spade holidays now. They go sailing in Norfolk. They would always make a point of going to Balmoral to be with the Queen. And I think that is all part of anchoring and grounding them as a family, which is obviously incredibly important. And the influence of the Middletons is something I cover in the book as well. You know, it's not just the sort of royal influence that these children are having. They're having the most wonderful experience with the Middletons too, whether that's baking or beach holidays or whatever it might be.
Non-royal cousins.
Yes, and that's really important for them. Now,
we did touch on it earlier, but do you think that they might be preparing their children for King Charles to do a bit of a Queen of Denmark and just suddenly, just completely slim down? the amount of members of the royal family?
You know, Charles's plans for a slimmed-down monarchy are, have been long known, and he's determined that the monarchy shouldn't be a drain on the taxpayer's purse. I mean, I don't think Charles is going to start kicking his relatives out of grace and favour apartments, especially the elderly cousins of the Queen who have worked tirelessly. I mean, you look at Princess Alexandra and the many engagements she continues to carry out. But I think there's going to be a change of guard, and I think it is going to be narrowed. And that, that projection, that cover of the book is all about what the top tier of monarchy looks like. That's what it looks like for Charles. But he's also got who the Queen referred to as her substitutes, the Wessexes, the Princess Royal. And I think, they have proved themselves as really important and valuable assets.
There's one name you're definitely missing out there. Prince Andrew. What are we going to do about him?
Yes, well, I think a very clear decision has been made on that. And, there's no coming back into public life for Prince Andrew. There just can't be. And this is something quite historic. I mean, I explore the relationship in the book between Charles and Andrew, and there has been a fair amount of friction, I think it's fair to say, between the two of them over many years. And it's always been Charles's intention, as we saw with Beatrice and Eugenie losing their protection, being told that they really needed to forge their own lives and their own careers, which they have done. There's just not going to be a return to life for Andrew.
I mean, with putting aside just for a second all the hideous scandal and just sort of like nasty business with Prince Andrew and Virginia Robertson, it seems like what you're saying there, Charles and Andrew had tension, Harry and William have tension. Do you think that
it's a family?
Is it just the destiny between the heir and the spare? Are we one day going to be discussing this about George and Charlotte?
Well, who knows? I mean, the heir and a spare, it is a dynamic that has resulted in historic tensions, absolutely. And you're right to point out between Andrew and Charles. I mean, I think when you look at Harry and his role as the spare, I actually think he made a real success of it, because there is no sort of job description. Until recently. But he carved out a role. I'm talking about the Invictus Games. I'm talking about his military career. I'm talking about the things that he did do to great effect, not just hanging on the coattails of being the spare. Where you see with Andrew, there's a great temptation to do that. So will it be played out again? We'll have to wait and see. Everything we see between the dynamic between George and Charlotte at the moment, though, is you're seeing a lovely little support act there. It's very sweet.
But then we did, sorry, I feel like I'm doom and gloom. We did see that with Harry and William back in the day when they were cute little kids.
Absolutely.
I'm not trying to sort of like hope for that. But one of the problems that Charles is going to face is that even before the Queen's passing, we've always looked speculating at his reign, but also William's. Do you think that if that continues, there's going to be an interesting, tense dynamic between Charles and William?
No, I actually think the dynamic between the King, Charles, and William now, the heir apparent, is actually a really good dynamic. I mean, I'm told they speak almost daily on the phone. And this is a relationship that we know has had sort of tensions in the past. They are very aligned. They're absolutely aligned on the Andrew front. They're aligned on the streamlined monarchy. I think their vision, I'm told sovereignty is just what has absolutely brought them together. They're totally aligned on the future of the monarchy. And Charles made it very clear in his very first address to the nation that he was going to serve for his life. There was no suggestion of any leapfrogging. I'm always asked in the States, will he hand over the reins? Well, he's kind of quashed all of that speculation by making it clear this is a job for him for life too. And actually, I think for the Prince of Wales, he doesn't want that response. It's not that he doesn't want the responsibility to just say, he doesn't want to step into that role at the moment. He has a young family. He's got things he wants to do now as the Prince of Wales.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one relationship that obviously is key is the one between Charles and his Queen Consort, Camilla. She's always positioned herself as support to Charles, but you suggest there are times when she actually calls the shots. What have you said about that?
Well, I think they're clearly a brilliant team, and she's absolutely, I mean, one supports the other. I mean, I think just on a superficial level, you saw that you mentioned Pengate, and you saw that the sort of calming influence was Camilla, who took the pen and calmed him down. And listen, it's a silly...
But with the air of a woman who's seen it a million times before.
But I think, you can project that onto a much greater scale. And I think she is absolutely devoted to him. I mean, theirs is a real love story. They've been through thick and thin together. She, I don't think she ever set out with the intention of being queen, but she will do her duty. She will support her husband, and I think she's brilliant for him. And I think there is an element of being the secret power as well behind the throne, because there is she does have an influence. I spoke to Philip Bonham Carter, who was a cameraman on the Jonathan Dimbleby interview that Charles gave, and he said even back then he could see the influence that Camilla had on Charles.
Don't you think, I mean, never mind the crown, there's a whole film to be made about Camilla. You know, it's the ultimate love story. She's been through a lot to get to the point she's in now. I find it fascinating.
She has, and I think the fact that the Queen made it known that she wanted her to be Queen Consort Camilla, that she bestowed the highest honours that she could. The Queen recognised it. The Queen saw it, and I think now the people are seeing it. She's very hardworking. She's very devoted. And I tell you what, you talk about tapping into the next generation and being relevant. It's very much on Charles and Camilla's agenda. And you see Camilla doing amazing work for vulnerable women, for victims of abuse. You know, I think they've really got their finger on the pulse.
Now, just back to our former Queen, just for a second, you reveal that if it weren't for a BBC blunder, we would actually know a lot more than we do about the Queen.
Yes, well, Philip Bonham Carter, the cameraman who I mentioned to you earlier, he worked on the royal family. So there's some wonderful stories about behind the scenes on the royal family in the book. And he worked on Elizabeth R. And that was made during the early 90s. So a very difficult time for the royal family, of course, 92 being her annus horribilis. And but apparently most of that archive, the outtakes and everything else have gone missing. So
somebody must have those. Somebody must know.
They've not been seen or recovered. So I think there's a lot of footage that unfortunately, sadly, has been lost.
Did he tell you any of the nature of that? You know, what kind of things that he saw that no one else will see?
Well, he got to see, yes, he did. He got to see Margaret Thatcher go to see the Queen when she resigned, got to see after that. I mean, he had pretty remarkable access. I mean, he said to me on more than one occasion, he thought he'd be asked to put his cameras down, and he never was. The cameras rolled and rolled and rolled, and the Queen was incredibly generous with her access.
That's absolutely
and then
amazing.
Invited him to watch the edit, and apparently you got invited to go and watch the final programme if the Queen was pleased with it. So she must have been pleased with it, because they got invited for tea.
Rather than straight to the Tower. Now, you do print interviews with the late Lady Elizabeth Anson, who was a cousin and confidant of the Queen. What kind of a picture of the monarch did she give you?
A fascinating one. I mean, I've been very respectful to the memory of Lady Elizabeth, and we had a friendship that spanned, well over a decade. And I suppose she got to see the Queen in a way that very few other people did. She maintained a close contact with her cousin all through the COVID pandemic. And she gave some quite fascinating insight into the run-up to the royal wedding. And she really conveyed to me the Queen as a person, and we forget she was a person, a human with real feelings and emotions. And you know, I think I got to see more of that side to the Queen, and really learnt a lot more about her as a grandmother, as a great-grandmother, you know, because she played so many roles. She wasn't just monarch, she played many roles.
I think so many of us really want to know what she was really thinking in the whole Sussex's drama of the last couple of years. I mean, while she was still alive, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been very at pains to say that they've got nothing but admiration and respect, and they're still in contact with her. Is that the reality?
Well, it's very true that they were still in touch with her. I mean, I know that the Queen would take calls always from Harry. She always made time. She loved Harry. They had a very, very special relationship. But my understanding from the conversations I had was that she could never truly understand why he gave it all up, because for a young girl who was never destined to be Queen, but who made that pledge to serve for her whole life, duty it was in her DNA. So the idea that one of hers could turn their backs on that duty, I think she did struggle to understand that.
And, well, apparently you quote Elizabeth Anson as saying that the Queen was actually upset by Harry's comments about duty.
I think she was upset. She couldn't understand that. I know the comment let me just pick that up. I think the comment we're speaking about here is after Harry had spoken about no one wanting the responsibility of being king. I'm paraphrasing, but it was an interview with Newsweek, and she just couldn't understand that comment, that sort of no one would want duty. I mean, because she was thrust into it with no choice whatsoever. When her father became king, the one certainty in her life was that she would be queen, and that was just non-negotiable.
It's interesting, isn't it? I want to talk just briefly about this thing you wrote about, that she was astonished by William and Kate's decision to not hire a nanny. How do you think she viewed the way the Cambridges did things?
One of the stories I was told was that the Queen went to visit Prince George when he was just born and they were still living at Kensington Palace. They hadn't moved to Anmar at that point. They were in a little cottage. It wasn't the big apartment. And the Queen had gone to visit, and I think, you know, George was having a good old scream. It was that very hot summer. There was no air conditioning. I think there was a fan on rotation. And
I love that even the royals can't get good air conditioning.
No, even the royals didn't. Not in that cottage, they didn't. And no nanny, no night nurse, no nanny, no anything. And of course, for the Queen, who'd sort of grown up in that generation where, you know, the royal children did have a nanny. I mean, the Queen went off and did a tour of the Commonwealth when she had young children.
Well, even as a child, I'd heard of Crawfey.
Yes, we've all heard of Crawfey. You know, that was what she was used to. Yes, she was very surprised that there wasn't a nanny. And of course, eventually they did hire a nanny. But again, it was them wanting to be hands-on from the start.
And how do you think the Queen would view this idea that William, when he is king, definitely sees Queen Catherine as more of an equal than a consort?
Well, I mean, in many ways, the late Duke of Edinburgh is an absolute equal with the Queen. I mean, he was the one person who could speak to the Queen in a way that no one else could. And, you know, the Queen, more than anyone, would know how important that role of consort is, that support, so that, you know, when the spotlight's off you and you need someone to really get it. Philip always got it. That's why he was so important to her. She wouldn't have been, I don't think, probably the Queen she was without him. And she would, you know, she adored Catherine. She, you know, she saw how much she brought to the royal family. I think she's very, very proud of them and the dynasty and what they will one day step up and do.
Now, you also say that the era of never complain, never explain must come to an end. How do you think that will actually come across in practice?
Well, you know, the Queen's mantra very much was never complain, never explain, but, you know, also key to the success of her reign was her ability to sort of modernise and adapt, and we saw that through the social media and everything else she did. But, you know, she would never sort of tackle criticism. She wouldn't sort of engage. She never gave an interview. And so we see, you know, we do see the new generation of royalty doing things differently, sitting down, giving interviews, you know, and answering back when they need to. I mean, I think we saw the Prince of Wales do that, particularly after that quite difficult tour to the Caribbean, where, you know, he addressed those issues. He wasn't just going to stay quiet about it. And so I think we will see more of that. I think we'll see more of that with the King's reign and more of that with the Prince of Wales too. With
your book, is there any particular thing that you uncovered, that you wrote about, that surprised you with all of your years of royal experience in reporting?
Gosh, that's such a hard question to answer. I suppose it was the insight into the Queen that, for me, was most fascinating and eye-opening. And as you say, it's what we always wanted to know. How did she really feel about Megxit? How did she really feel about the family rift? And I got to learn about that, not just as how she felt about it as monarch, because we know the moves she did were to protect the institution of the monarchy, to protect the crown, but how she felt as a grandmother. You know, I found that very moving.
Thank you, Katie. A reminder that Katie's book is called The New Royals. I'm going to hold it up for you. Queen Elizabeth's Legacy and the Future of the Crown. It's published on the 4th of October by Hachette. My thanks to Katie and to you, of course, for watching. Join us again on Thursday for Palace Confidential. Bye-bye.